John 7:12. Et murmur multus Deo erat in turba, quida enim dicebant quia bonus est, alii autem dicebant non, sed seducit turbas. And there was a great deal of muttering concerning him in the crowd, for some were saying that he is a good man, but others were saying, no, rather, he is leading astray the crowds. There's a few interesting things to note about this longish verse in terms of both its vocabulary and syntax. First of all, we can talk about the word murmur. In general, in antiquity, it seems to have been of the neuter gender, but you'll see that that is not the case in our translation of the Greek. Here we get murmur multus. Augustine actually reads for this verse instead, more typically, murmur multum, and Erasmus in the 16th century decides to skirt the ambiguous issue of the gender of murmur altogether and proposes instead murmuratio multa. So which was it, neuter or masculine? Well, it seems that there are a few recorded cases of a masculine murmur, but in general it was neuter. And so this is kind of an odd and rare choice on the part of our translator. Or it may be that our evidence just is not very complete and that the masculine version of murmur was just more common than our surviving textual evidence would indicate. So that's kind of an interesting point to begin with. And very naturally, murmur goes together with this prepositional phrase, Deo, concerning, in the ablative case, him. And that's the ille of our previous verse, that is Jesus Christ. So he was the cause of a whole lot of murmuring and talking. And the word murmur, just like the Greek word which underlies it, is onomatopoeic. That is, it is meant itself to imitate the sound that people make when they do this action. So at murmur multus, or multum, we could say, erat Deo, there was a lot of murmuring going on concerning him in turba, in the midst of the crowd of people who were there at the festival, in die festo, we might say, in the translator's own idiom. Here we want to introduce a pause, quidam enim, and it's important to notice, though you might not notice right away, that we have two coordinating pronominal words here, quidam and alii. We might just as easily have said alii ... alii. That's another common construction. But very commonly, native speakers and writers replaced one at least of those members with a different or equivalent word. So quidam is an indefinite pronoun. Quidam, certain people. But we could translate it just the same way as we would if we had alii, as I did when I translated the verse. So in other words, some, let's not forget our enim, this is giving a reason or a cause, right? For some were saying, and what is it that they were saying? They were saying, bonus est. He's a good man. Now, if this were classical Latin, we wouldn't expect quia plus quotation, or quod, or quoniam plus quotation, which you get all the time in the Vulgate and in late Latin generally. We would expect the accusative infinitive instruction. We talked about this before. You would expect something like dicebant bonum esse. They were saying that he was, in time contemporaneous with that of the main verb, they were saying that he was a good man. But here we get quia bonus est, and if we don't overthink it, we'll understand what is being reported to us. And then here we get another quotation introduced by similar formula. Ali autem, and here I think autem really does have its adversative force because there's a contrast here, right, between what some say and what others say. So on the other hand, others were saying, and we get that nice third person plural, imperfect indicative active form there. Again, dicebant, others were saying, And here's what they were saying. Non, we could add an exclamation point here if we wanted to, or just a comma. Depends how forceful we want this rejection to be. No, quite simply, but rather, and this is, again, a quotation. This is the speech of the people being reported, some people in the crowd, we should say, but rather, se ducit turbas. He's leading astray the masses, the crowds of people here at the festival. And seduco is a word that you could use of like drawing someone off the path. And of course, it ultimately is reflected in our English derivative, seduce, which has, of course, a rather more narrow and restricted meaning in English, but the key idea is there. You're drawing someone away from where they should be, sort of by nefarious means. It almost always has negative connotations. So non here is just more or less equivalent to not so. And you can think of the famous work of Peter Abelard called Sic et non, literally yes and no, or so and not so. That's what people are saying here. Non, not so, but rather this is what he's doing. He's not a good man, in other words, but he is kind of a nefarious force. So again, the main thing to keep in mind here is you've got these two balanced and coordinated clauses, quidam and alii. So that's just a reminder. Reading a Latin sentence through several times before you begin to think about what it means is always a good idea, because with some practice, that will start to be the first thing that you notice. Hey, what are the structuring principles that divides this verse into different units, and how do they relate to one another? Now, this one might have been a bit harder to notice than if we had alii. A simple repetition would have maybe clued us in a little bit faster to that. But once you've seen this sort of thing a few times, you get used to looking, especially when you see alii, for some other equivalent member, even if it's not another alii, but an equivalent word like quidam.